want to talk to you today about how do we win with our kids. Last week we looked at winning at home. How do we have marriages that we feel like are like doing well and we're moving ahead? And it's interesting to me that God addresses the topic of children and of parenting. There's not a lot there, and yet in many ways what little is there is spoken of in great volumes. It's going to be fun today because we have people all across the spectrum. I have kids in here. I have parents of little kids. I have parents of teens. I have parents of grown kids in here. And so this idea of parenting well, of winning as parents, knows no age spectrum. I just on Friday was struggling with how to open this message, and across my feed came this: 7 habits that push adult children away. So let's go to the other end of the spectrum here. Let's talk about those of us that have adult children, and what are the things that my generation would do that would push my kids away from me. And that's going to be some of you in here. You're going to have college-age kids. You're going to have 20-something kids, 30-something kids. You might have kids in their 40s. What are the habits that are going to drive your kids away from you? I would think you would want your kids to stay close. Maybe you don't, right? Maybe you're like, I raised them, man, God bless, they're out there. If there's any part of you that wants your kids to stay close, here are things that the 20s, 30s, and 40s, from their perspective, cause a chasm between them and their parents. Here's one of the things that they said: constant criticism. That they don't feel like they can do things right enough to please mom and dad who are older. One of the things I'd love for you to run through your grid is this. As you sit here today, do any of these resonate with you? Were you criticized as a 30-something by your parents? Did they always want to tell you how you could do a little bit better? Then you know what that feels like. Overstepping boundaries. Dropping in unexpectedly. Hey, I'm your mom, I'm your dad, we should be able to do this. Not respecting privacy. Not thinking ahead. Just assuming because that you're still hanging on to that parent-child relationship. I've seen it happen. I bet you have too. And you know when you see it, it's not pleasant. Here's another thing that was said. An overemphasis on family traditions. Because it was important to my family, I want to push it down and make sure it's important on my kids. An overemphasis on always maybe having to be there. One of the early things that we had to fight when our kids were small was this. There came a point when we quit trying to please our parents by being at everybody's house on holiday. Remember that battle? Right? And so when you got 2 sets of parents, or in today's economy, there may be 3 sets, 4 sets of parents if the parents are separated, and everybody wants Christmas. I had news for you. There came a point when my kids' health and carting them around on Christmas and the hassle we had to face by 3 o'clock in the afternoon because our kids were exhausted at being 2 or 3 places, we said no. We'll give somebody Christmas Eve. We'll give somebody Christmas Day. We will do Thanksgiving here, and we'll do Thanksgiving another day. But that overemphasis on family traditions and the way things used to be and trying to maintain that. Here's another one, playing the guilt card. Parents in my generation guilting your kids to do what you want them to do. Making them feel bad in their parenting, making them feel bad in their spending, making them feel bad on how they vote, making them feel bad on what? Playing the guilt card over lack of time spent. You never come over. We never get to see the grandkids. Why is that? Doesn't the phone ring both ways? I'm sorry, my phone rings both ways. You never call. Well, that's funny, you don't call me. Here's another one. Expecting that your kids, my 20s, 30s, and 40s kids, are always going to be there to meet my needs. Expecting that my kids are still going to be there to meet my emotional needs. If there's separations that have occurred, trying to get my kids on my side. I want them to see my side. I want them to see how my spouse is, whatever. So I said here, taking sides. Overprotecting, over-worrying drives kids away. Last one here that separates kids from their parents as they get older is a disapproval of the spouse, the other spouse. And you let it be known how bad they are, whatever your gripes are about them. And I'm going to share some stories because we've lived some of this. So I'm speaking firsthand. I don't know what's happening in your world. I can only speak for what the Warman family has had to overcome. And we've touched on more than a couple of these things in here. And I can say, yeah, it's spot on. How do we win the day with our kids? Let me introduce you to ours. If some of you may or may not be familiar, bear with me if you know our family. Just thought it would be fun. This is Eric. Eric will be 36 in November. Eric is down in Dallas. He just got married in June. Eric and Lindsay just starting out in this thing called marriage, but they've been together, 5, 6, 7 years. He's an accountant by trade, really good with numbers, typical, I would say, type A firstborn child, right? He was the one that was our, those of you who say you got a strong-willed child, we can relate. Eric sort of fit that mold for us. We have a good relationship. I would say we have a good relationship with Eric and Liz. We have a good relationship with all our kids. I want to go on record as saying that. There's none of these kids that are a pain or a source to us. This is Kirsten. She was up here singing. Her husband, Danny. If you're around Stonebridge at all, you know Kirsten and Danny and James. Kirsten, typical second born. She was the funny one, is the funny one. Just kind of wanting, growing up, second-borns want approval. First-borns tend to have it. Second-borns feel like they got to grab it. They got to find it. And that was Kirsten. She's a great student. She was a great athlete. And they've been great parents, a great mom and dad. This is Joe. Joe is 30. He's a barista at Upshot Coffee in St. Charles. He was at Coma Coffee for a number of years down across from the Galleria. Joe, for me, was maybe my most difficult child. And this is always interesting because this is being filmed, right? So I get this. So I know Joe's not watching, but it may get back to him. Joe was a challenge for me. I remember conversations with Joe about Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck was he like the political dude from yesteryear? He's no longer relevant. But man, I just remember where is this coming from? I'm not political in the least, and Joe's coming home with this stuff. And Joe, one of Joe's claim to fame as he went through Zumwalt West High School was apparently there are still kids that remember that Joe was the kid who went through high school barefoot, didn't wear shoes. And I didn't find out till after the fact. But that was Joe. Joe sort of marched and Joe marches to his own drummer. He's a good kid. Joe's the kid that I finally came to a spot and said, I'm not going to fight over hair. Joe was that kid that had mohawks and had different color hair. And I finally just said to Patty, I said, that's not a hill I want to die on, what Joe looks like. Not going to matter much to me, right? There are other bigger issues, right? And then there is Casey and Ryan. If you're around here, you see Ryan leads, and Casey's been involved with the middle school. Casey's our youngest one. She's a speech language professional at early childhood there in Zumwalt. She's the one that our couple oldest kids, everybody went away to school, but Casey went 8 hours up to Michigan State. And I remember telling her at the time that was a very brave thing to do. It's one thing to go a couple hours away and you can always get home. It's another to know that you're just not coming home. And some of you know what that's like. Your kids have gone far away to school for college and they're not coming home, except maybe at break and, at the holidays. Casey is very tender-hearted. I think all my kids are. Casey and Kirsten, I would say, are very tender-hearted towards other people, which is a good thing. They get that from Mom, not from me. But as I've reflected back now where they're all at as adults, I want to speak to you out of parenting these guys. 15 years in student ministry gave me a chance to see hundreds of families. You don't get to see that. I worked with literally hundreds of kids and families in 15 years being a youth pastor. We did. So I got to see parenting up close in a lot of different perspectives. The other thing that makes it unique for us was we took in a young lady, when our kids were all small, we took in a young lady by the name of Pauline, who was a sophomore in high school because her family was dysfunctional. And she was having to actually dole out the number of cigarettes to Mom. So think about that. The 15-year-old in the house was in charge of Mom and how much she smoked. And finally, there got to be a spot where her grades and so forth were suffering that they just approached us, and we worked, and we had Pauline for the last 2 years of her high school. And I tell you, you talk about an instant grow up. I will never forget this. It was like, all right, well, this is all cool. Pauline, you got a room in the basement. Kind of do your thing. Just get good grades. Don't get in trouble because I'm not really your dad. And I'll never forget, they went prom dress shopping. And they came home with a couple. And they're like, what do you think? And I thought, if I'm going to take this dad role seriously, I don't know if you remember, I remember that conversation going, no, I don't think that dress is going to work. And you talk about feeling awkward, it wasn't, I do remember but it was the moment for me where it was like, I really am a parent of a high school girl. And my world changed a little bit there before I actually have my kids growing into this. So how do we win with our kids? What I want us to understand to begin with is this, that in Jesus' day, well, here's this. The goal of parenting is raising kids who are going to love Jesus and live life well. That should be your goal. I don't know if you've ever thought about, if you've got little ones, what are you trying to accomplish? What do you want? If you got older kids, what are you doing? Some of you just trying to survive. Some of you just want to get them out of the house. I understand that. I want to ask you to think about something bigger. There's a bigger picture for your kids, and it is that they really would live life well. Anybody want to see their kids have a train wreck? Yeah. Right? Let me sign up for that. No, you don't. Anybody with your grandkids want to see them grow up to be like a disaster? You want that? Do you want that for your kids? No, you don't. So what is it you do want? And I've always believed that I wanted kids that would, in my vernacular here, my words, I never wanted to be my kids' friends. I never, as a parent, was shooting to be the friend of my kids. I wanted them to respect me. And I honestly, in my core, believed that if I had them, that they respected me, we would get to be a spot where we'd be friends. But it was never my goal to be my kid's friend. It was always to be their dad. It was for Patty to be their mom. That's who we were. And so we fought for that. I want you to want to raise your kids to win at life and to love Jesus. And if your kids will do that, it doesn't matter what their job is, doesn't matter where they go in life, you'll feel like you're winning. Primarily because you won't be having to deal with the other stuff that comes from when you feel like you're not winning, that saps your energy. But how do I get there? How do I get kids who will love Jesus and do well in life? It's not always been easy. Jesus wants this. Mark chapter 10 is a passage that if you've grown up in church, you're familiar with it. It's the story when Jesus is out with his disciples. I think they've been doing some ministry. They're a little tired. And parents started bringing their kids to Jesus because they wanted the rabbi to bless them. It's the same thing that I make fun of today. We want the politician to kiss our children, right? You just want the well-known person to pat them on the head. So they're bringing their kids to Jesus, and the disciples are stopping them. You know why? Because in Jesus' day, kids were property. That's all they were. Kids had no status whatsoever. I grew up with a parent who would say to me, kids are to be seen and not heard. That was said in my household. on more than one occasion. Kids are to be seen and not heard. This is worse than that. This is literally, you are like right there next to the slave. In Jesus' day and in Paul's day, there was this thing called the father's power. It literally worked like this. When a newborn was born, when a baby was born, my understanding is it was placed at the feet of the father. If the father picked the child up and embraced the child and took the child home, things were good. But the father's power in Jesus' culture meant this. The father could just as easily, without any guilt, without any shame, get up, leave that child there. That child would either be sold at auction or that child would be cast out to the city to the dogs. Maimed children, sometimes girls. Man, you're holding your fingers crossed whether dad's going to accept you. When you think about something in a culture that talks about abortion a lot, I'm just telling you, I'm challenged with this one. Neither Jesus nor Paul spoke about abortion. And we talked today about abortion in the womb. What is this when the child comes to the feet of the father and the father can walk away? And literally would let the child die, be taken, be sold. Because the children were nothing more than property. He might take you if you're a son, because sons had value. The value of the son was they could work the land and maybe eventually inherit the family business. But if you were a daughter, if there was anything sickly about you, many a dad just got up and walked away and left the child there. Into this culture, Jesus said to the disciples when they were stopping the kids, let the children come. Jesus wanted children. He wanted them to know they were loved. He would bless them. He would want the best for them. Jesus raised the dignity of children. They didn't have it. And into this culture, the Apostle Paul, when he's writing to these new churches who are forming, doesn't give much instruction, but he gives a couple of things that I think are really kind of interesting to dissect. That's what I want to spend some time with, all right? Here's the first thing. He says in Colossians chapter 3, if you have a Bible and you want to turn there, we saw last week, he said, wives, submit your husbands as is fitting the Lord. He said, husbands, love your wives. Don't be harsh against them. Verse 20, children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. And then he's got this sentence here where he says to dads, fathers, do not embitter or provoke your children, or they will become discouraged. That's all he's got in the family. Husbands, love your wives. Wives, submit, respect your husbands. Children, you should obey. Fathers, don't cause your kids to become angry. And the book of Ephesians, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise that it's going to go well with you and you would enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, don't exasperate your kids. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. That's all we got. New Testament. There's just a little bit there. So, 2 times he says this. He says, for us to teach our kids that disobedience is dangerous. Now, it's written to kids, and I could say this, hey, kids, you're supposed to obey your parents, and everybody shrugs, like, oh, okay, right. I want to ask the bigger question. Why do kids need to learn to obey? Why? And some of you are going to answer it's because you don't want the hassle. When our kids are doing what we ask them to do, isn't life a little freer? And you don't want the hassle of having to put up with disobedient kids. Could I get you to think a little bit bigger? That's way too shallow. Why do you want to teach your kids to obey? And it's because this sentence I think is so true. Disobedience is dangerous. I want you to think about it from this perspective. Beginning with your children, all through life is lived under authority. It's going to move from the house to a teacher. It's going to move from a teacher maybe to a coach. It's going to move from maybe a teacher, coach to a boss. It's going to move from maybe those early jobs to a career. And people who do not understand how to live under authority will get hurt. They will not do well in life. Some of you understand that. Some of you are struggling today because here's why. Because you don't know how to live under authority. You don't want people telling you what to do. You chafe when a boss gives you a correction. Sort of rankles you a little bit. And you've never stopped to ask why. I got a hunch it came out of your childhood. You have not learned what it means to live under authority. All of life is lived under authority. When our kids don't learn what it's like to live under authority, they set themselves up for pain. They're going to get hurt. Disobedience is dangerous. So I thought, okay, all of life is lived under authority. To live in rebellion, put your life in danger. Audrey Lopez, 13 years old, California. Anybody remember the story? Probably not. I came across it as I was doing my research. 13 years old. He was out on the streets of California on just, I think a Saturday afternoon, maybe Friday afternoon, about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. He had a fake AK-47 under his arm, an airsoft rifle with the orange tip broke off. Okay? And he's out walking along, but from all accounts, when you looked at that AK-47, it looked like the real deal. 2 uniformed officers roll up on this young man with a friend, and they get out and they pull, because you got a kid walking the streets with an AK-47 that looks, by all accounts, to be very real. They ordered Audrey to drop his gun. Audrey turned around and raised the gun. As Audrey turned around and raised the gun, he was shot dead multiple times. Shot dead multiple times. He was shot multiple times and he died at the scene. One of the officers there was a 20-year veteran of SWAT who said he could not distinguish that airsoft rifle from an AK-47. And he literally thought his life was in danger when this kid ignores their instructions to stop and drop the gun and wheels and points. And he died. 13 years old. And the city was in uproar. Everybody was upset. Police brutality. No one stopped to think that that young man had a choice in the moment to do what he was told, and he didn't do it. I'm not blaming a mom and dad because I don't know. I'm just telling you what happened was there was a 13-year-old that didn't need to die that day because he didn't know how to stop and obey. I go the other end. I heard the story of a 3-year-old that wouldn't listen to mom. And whenever mom would say stop, the child would continue to run and turn around and laugh at mom. Thought it was funny. And mom and dad sort of thought, because I watch parents. You ever watch parents who's little terrible twos and they laugh at them? You ever see that? I cringe. I tell parents all the time, if you can't control your 3-year-old, God help you at 16. At 3-year-old, I could still physically pick them up and make them do what I want them to do. You can't at 16. 3-year-old thought it was funny, cute, run away. Mom said stop as the child approached the street. The child looked back at mom, true story, looked back at mom, laughed, took another step, was struck. Because the child didn't know to obey mom. You say, man, that's really drastic. That doesn't happen much. Consider a 7-year-old on an airplane. And the instructions are, turn off your devices. And the 7-year-old keeps playing. And the stewardess walks by and says, honey, turn off your iPad. And the kid keeps playing. The stewardess walks by a second time and looks at the mom sitting next to the child and says, he needs to turn off his iPad. And nothing happens. The third time through, the stewardess stands, hovers over the child shuts down the iPad. The stewardess walks back to her seat. The child gets the iPad back out, opens it back up, and begins to play, all the while mom does nothing. Is that mom setting their kid up to get shot? When you will not have your child obey, are you setting them up for something much, much worse? Because here's the deal. They learn obedience from you. Disobedience is dangerous. Oh, it's going to stifle your child. It's going to, some of the stuff that's out there, like we're trying to spoil their creativity and all that. I'm trying to keep my kids alive. I understand how the world works. I understand that they will first learn what it's like to follow orders and follow instructions in the home. I have a hunch why things are so terrible in our schools and we lament and we wag our tongues at all the stuff in the schools. It's happening in the homes. Parents are not in control of their kids at home, and we send them to the schools, and the teachers, which should be spending time instructing, have to spend equal amounts of time disciplining. We need to teach our kids that disobedience is dangerous. It will hurt them. They will suffer. And it starts with us living under God's authority and helping them understand that, because there's going to come a point in time when they're no longer under your authority and you want them to obey God. I would hope that's what you want for your children, that they would follow Jesus and they would learn what it's like to obey Him as they've learned to obey us. The second thing that I think this passage says is we need to protect their hearts. It says dads, but the term actually means moms and dads. Don't embitter your kids. Don't provoke them to anger. Guard their hearts, because those hearts when they're young are so precious. They're so impressionable. Let me ask you to think about this. How is it that parents cause their kids anger? And what I want you to do is think about it from your own upbringing. Did you experience it as you were a kid growing up? Were your parents well-meaning? They're trying to do the right thing, but you still found yourself out of sorts because of things they said or did? How is it that parents provoke their kids to anger? I wrote down when parents are inconsistent, when we say one thing and do another. I may be the only one in here who grew up with a parent who told me many times, do as I say, not as I do. Do as I say, not as I do. Here was the premonition. Here was the idea, right? Well, I'm the parent. I can do whatever I want. You're the kid. And yet as kids, here's where it came to a head with me. 5th grade, we'll never forget this Sunday. My mom came in, said to me and my brother, time to get up and go to church. I'm in 5th grade. Time to get up and go to church. I hated going to church. Grandma went to church. That's why we went. It wasn't a bad church. I liked sleeping in on Sunday mornings. You know what I said as a 5th grader to my mom? I looked at my mom and I said, you guys don't go to church. Why do you make us? As a 5th grader, I knew that. Why do you make me get up and go to church when you don't get up and go to church? And they never said another word to us on another Sunday. It was never an issue again. Don't tell me that your kids aren't watching and they don't see our inconsistencies. They do. You kid yourself if you think like you can just tell them, well, do as I say, not as I do. Right? I think kids get angry when we make rules in our household, but there's no sense of love. As a student pastor, we always talked about that we want rules without a relationship leads to rebellion. Some of you know what it's like. You grew up in legalistic homes, but you never felt loved. You never felt approval. And so it comes a point where you just turn and you fight against that. Rules without a relationship will always lead to rebellion. You need a loving relationship with your kid. Your kid needs to know that you're on their side, and therefore then when it comes to the rules, you're explaining why we're doing this. Nothing good ever happens after midnight. That was a rule that we had. How do I know that? Am I wrong? Okay, so nothing, maybe a bit of a stretch. Few things good happen after midnight. Man, we fought that one with our kids. but I want them to understand that I don't want to see them in a bad situation. I think another thing that parents do is, feels so weird except I hear the stories. I want to ask kids. There's not many of you here, but I just want to ask you. So, do you have brothers or sisters? You're not an only child. You have brothers or sisters. Everybody has brothers or sisters, right? I want to ask you a question. No show of hands. I want you to look for facial expressions. This will be interesting to me. Do your parents have favorites? You have favorites? There are favorites in my household. My mom always felt like she was the ugly one between her and her sister. My mom felt like she could do no good between her and her sister. My mom always felt like her sister was the favored one in her growing up. And I don't know that they intentionally played favorites between me and my brother, but I do know that's true, that did happen. That one was seen as favored and the other one not favored. Parents, you know the thing you want to be said when, and I think this is true because we've asked. If you were to ask our kids who's the favorite, you know what I want them to say? Tell you what we want them to say. You would ask our kids, Mom and Dad have a favorite, who's the favorite? I want them to say that they were. I want all 4 of my kids to think they were the favorite. That's when you know you're doing a good job. Because they all feel like they're special. They all feel like they have your love and they have your back, you have their backs. But if kids all would say, oh no, Joey's the favorite, you probably have a problem. Because it's going to seem unfair, it's going to seem not right, you're going to see they get all the breaks, I get all the, all that stuff that enters into this. We break kids' hearts when we're inconsistent, when we make a bunch of rules but they don't sense our loves, when we're playing favorites with them. Here's what a 10-year-old said. 10-year-old. Grown-ups make promises all the time, and then they forget about them, or else they say it wasn't really a promise, just a maybe. Grown-ups don't do the things they're always telling us kids to do, like pick up their things or be neat or always tell the truth. Oh. Want your kids to tell the truth? You tell little white lies? You don't think your kids see it? They always pretend that they weren't mistakes or that somebody else made them. Grown-ups interrupt kids all the time and think nothing of it. If a child interrupts a grown-up, he gets a scolding or something worse. Grown-ups never understand how much kids want a certain thing, a certain color or a shape or a size. If the grown-up doesn't like it, they say, I can't imagine why you'd want that old thing. Sometimes grown-ups punish their kids unfairly. If it isn't right, if you've done just some little thing wrong and grown-ups take away something that means an awful lot to you. Other times you can do something really bad and they say they're going to punish you, but then they don't. You just never know. You ought to know. Grown-ups are always talking about what they did and what they knew when they were 10 years old, but they never try to think about what it's like to be 10 years old now. How does a 10-year-old write that? More importantly, how does your 20-year-old write that? Because I see a lot more than a 10-year-old. How's my 36-year-old think like that? How do I do that? What's my 33-year-old? What do they see? Here's a third observation I'll make. We're going to teach them about Jesus. Bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Nurture just means to feed, means to care. Bring them up in the faith of Jesus. How do I do that? How do I do that effectively as a parent? There's not rocket science here. I'll tell you what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean you're perfect, because none of us are. It does mean you're consistent. Are you consistent in your walk? Do your kids see that your faith is real? It's authentic, something you talk about? Do they see us, I'll pick on some things. Do they see us give? Do they see us serve? Do they see us talk to other people about our faith? Is church just something we do, like I go to the sporting thing, like I eat and go to a restaurant? It's just one other thing I do. Is that what church is? Or is the body of Christ and my faith means something, and like we're going to be there on Sunday because it's important to our family. I'm not trying to guilt you. What I'm trying to help us understand is kids see the things that are important. And I will say this, if you never miss a soccer practice, but you can miss church, your kid knows what's more important. You don't have to preach it. If you won't miss X practice, but things of the faith are optional, your kids will see it. And they'll just wonder why. And over enough time, they'll just know this is more important. I know what you say, but here's what we always did. How else do we do this with our kids? So we're authentic, we're modeling genuine faith. I think we want our kids to hear about and learn about forgiveness in the home. We model grace. Our kids know that when they mess up, that there is a forgiveness that occurs there. We're not holding grudges. What's the difference in your mind between punishment and discipline? Is there a difference? Do you punish your kids or you discipline them? You ought to sort that one out. Punishment looks to inflict pain over past poor choices. Discipline is looking to correct behavior for the future. I see that if this behavior continues, this is not going to go well, and so I need to speak to it. Punishment says, you made me mad, boom. No. You ticked me off, you embarrassed the family, all those things that enter into your head. Others are watching? No. We want to correct for future behavior. A few years back, my teen son got me a Father's Day card that I felt was very, I will say to you, disrespectful. And I opened the card and he thought it was funny and he sort of laughed and we chuckled. And I'm looking there in real time going, this is disrespectful, but he's a teen. Not a big deal, right? Got me a card, right? Don't make a big deal of it, right? It's going to be awkward if I make a deal of it now, right? I want things to be better in the future. If this goes unspoken, I have just tacitly said, this is okay. I can't do that. Patty will tell you there are certain things. And respect and disrespect are one of those lines that from the earliest I've said no. Absolutely, I will draw the line in the sand at respect and disrespect. And so after we got along, after everybody got away, we had a one-on-one and I said, I want you to know this card hurt me. I don't know what your intention was, but it hurt me that you thought this is okay. That's all I said. Trying to correct future behavior. And I think that's what we're doing. We're trying to have an authentic faith. We're modeling forgiveness. We're speaking the truth. We're spending time with them. We're praying over them. This is going to be my last observation for us. I want to speak to us. Some of you who have parents still alive. It says that we are to honor our father and mother, for it's the first commandment with a promise. You know, I thought it was interesting in 10 Commandments. The fifth commandment doesn't say, the fifth commandment is not, children, obey your parents. God had a shot. He's writing them all down. 10 of them. Why wasn't obedience one of the 10 commandments? It's not. Honor is. Because there comes a point when your kids are no longer obligated to obey you. I do not expect that my kids obey me now. I would like to think that as you as an adult are not under an obligation to obey your parents, but you are under a lifelong obligation to respect them. Honor them. Honor is a word of weight. It is to consider someone's opinion. It's to weigh it. It's to think seriously about it. out of respect for them, that they've been your parents, they've been there, they loved you, they brought you into this world, they provided for you, and so as you get older, you want to give weight to that opinion. But what if that opinion's whack? Anybody have parents who are, am I the only one? We're down here in Missouri, we're about here 6 or 7 years, I'll never forget this. My mom is sitting on the couch, and I'll just say, I believe that my home was what many of us would say was dysfunction. That's the home that I grew up in, is what it is. My mom says to me, when are you moving back home to your family? That's what my mom said to me. And I looked at her just dead fast and I said, I don't know, I think my family's in Missouri. No, your family's here in Michigan. I said, no, my family's in Missouri. Patty, my kids, we're all in Missouri. That's where my family is. Well, what about us? I said, I love you guys, but my family is in Missouri. We were married about 4 months. And we had just 4 months. We're newlyweds, right? Let's just talk to Patty about this. And Patty invited my mom over just for coffee and hang out. And my mom unloaded on Patty. You never invite us over. You guys are so disrespectful. Now, mind you, we saw my parents every week. We lived 2 miles from them. Every week we're with them at some point. This was news to us, right? 4 months. And I don't know, she said some other things. I got wind of that. Man, I was hot. What do you do, young man, young married man, when your mom just blasted your wife? You ever encountered that? As a married couple? One spouse, one side, attacks the other. What do you do? Patty would tell you, I picked up the phone, I called my mom, and I said, you will not speak to my wife like that ever again. If you want to continue to come over here, it can happen, but not like that. She's my wife. You're my mom. She's my wife. I promise you, I bet there are women, even with this small of audience, that wish that their men would stick up for them against their in-laws. But you won't, because you cower to them because of your mom and your dad. That relationship changed when you became an adult. You can honor them, but I was under no obligation to obey my parents once I got out of the house. We had a situation where my parents were smokers, like chimneys. That's the household I grew up in. Our newborn son has got some asthma stuff, and talking to the pediatrician, they're like, he just really shouldn't be in that environment. Picked up the phone, called my mom, and I said, we won't be bringing Eric over. You're welcome to watch him here, but we're not going to have him in that household. Well, you don't love us. Not our fault we smoke. Yada, 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 yada. I'm like, I get it. I understand. I'm just telling you, Eric's not going to be in your house because my son's health is more important to me. And you can watch him at our house. I wanted to honor my parents. I wanted to respect them, but I have a household that I'm responsible to God for. What's it like for you? How do you honor your parents today? I'm going to speak. I was asking Patty. I now have 4 kids that I want to honor us. I'm not looking for them to obey, but how can they honor? Call. Just keep your parents informed. They just want to know. They want to touch base. If they're doing all the calling to you, it means a lot when you call them. Ask their opinion about stuff. Doesn't mean you have to take it, but you can ask. Hey, I'm thinking about this. Hey, we're thinking about that. What do you think? You want input, don't you? It's going to be a little awkward because you may feel like I'm obligated. No, you're not obligated to take what they say, but you can involve them that way. I think one third way that you can honor your parents as they get older is understand this. You know their flaws. You know their failures. They know their failures. At some point, you've got to get to a spot where if there are walls there that have been built because of those failures, you need to address those. Cannot allow that to continue to divide you. They're not perfect. you're not perfect. How do I know you're not perfect? If I could have one off with your kids, they would tell me. So extend some grace to your parents. And it might be there's some hurts there and you'll never be tight. I understand that. I don't think God is looking for that. But man, don't go through the latter years with your parents with this stuff there that's never been addressed, because it's not healthy for your soul and it won't be healthy for your kids. You will pass on that dysfunction to your kids. Do you want that? Or do you want health? Do you want, when your kids get older, for them to respect you, to honor you? That's what I think that you want. That's what I believe God wants for you. There's a story told in the Native American world of when a young man would become 13. They would blindfold him and they would take him out into the woods for the night. And the idea was that he was going to become a brave. He was going to spend the night in the woods dealing with all the stuff, real and imaginary, right? He had been taught the skills. He knew the bow arrow. He knew how to use a knife, but now this is he's alone. This is his chance, right? So they take him out there. They blindfold him. They take the blindfold off. He's got to make a fire. He's basically got to survive the night out in the wild, right? And so you can just imagine 13 and whatever the sounds are and whatever sleep and whatever you get, right? You're just kind of always boom. And as the story goes, when the sunlight casts over the morning, it comes in, he would see a figure 100 yards or so out. I wouldn't know who it was because it was always with the sun behind it. That's how he positioned him. And then just as the sun got up a little bit more and he got acclimated, got his eyes, it was his dad. His dad had been with him all night. Keep him watch. And so I want you to remember, as we're trying to win with our kids, your father's with you. He's watching all night. He's got you. You're not parenting alone. But you are going to be in the thick of the battle. Call out for help. Ask him for strength. Ask him for wisdom. Team's coming up. Not only are you not alone, but when I get scared of my kids going out, I have to remember they're not alone. That same warrior who's got my back has my kids' back. When they go off to school, he's there with them. When they go off and get married, Jesus is there with them. And the greatest thing I can give my kids is to pass along a faith and a resiliency that the same God who has had me has them. And if I can do that, I will consider that a win. Let's sing this last song.